Hi, in this video we're going to show you how to install a gantry on a brand new CNC router if it was removed on shipping, or how to put your gantry into a square. Sometimes the gantry goes out of a square and it needs to be realigned. Basically, the first thing we want to do in installing a gantry is remove the side covers so your motors are accessible. So here we basically remove the side covers. Sometimes emergency stops are attached to the cover and we want to take that off. Basically here we are opening the motors from the gantry uprights. On this example, we're using a motor with belt transmission system, or your CNC might have gearbox or just direct couplers to ball screws. But basically we want to remove the motors from the uprights, and this makes it much easier to install the gantry. We're going to take off the wires from the motors. Here we have stepper motor, which means it uses only 4 wires, 4 phases, but if you have AC servo, then it's probably going to have more wires. Then once everything is removed, then we raise the gantry up. Here we're using pallet jack, and then you're going to slide the bearing blocks right under where the mounting plate is. It doesn't have to be exactly on top of it, but as long as you have it lined up, some when the holes are matching the bearing blocks, that's fine. And finally we lower the gantry to sit on top of the bearing blocks, and we tighten all the bolts. We don't want to over tighten them, so give them some playroom. We do it on both sides and just move the gantry by hand. Make sure it feels easy to move. You don't want to have to put too much pressure on it, because right now the rack is not engaged, so gantry is just moving on its bearing blocks. So if everything feels good, the next thing we want to do is make sure our gantry is in a square or is in line. What we have is, this is a vacuum tabletop, and it has crosshatch lines for vacuum, and all of these are basically square. So this is made when the gantry was a square. If your machine doesn't have the vacuum tabletop, just create a reference point when your machine was a square or when your machine is a square. Just make a reference line, so that shows you if your spindle goes from right side to left side and it stays on top of that line, that means your gantry is a square. So we tested the squareness, it was square, and so we basically tightening the bolts, and we installed one of the motors on one side. So basically we put the machine into square, move the spindle from right side to left side, and make sure it stays on top of the groove, and then tighten the motor on one side, and then reinstall the wires. So now with one motor on one side of the gantry, we do the test again. We bring our reference tool. It could be a bit. Right here we're using a clamp, and we just move it on the reference line. Again, on this machine we have a reference line for our vacuum. If you don't have it, then just create a reference line on your machine to make sure that you always can come back to it. We move it right to left. In this case, our machine is pretty square right now, but you might have to make a little bit of adjustment, and that's what we're going to show you next. Now that we have a reference square, we can install the other motor on the other side and test it again. So right now with the motor loose, we have a little bit play, so we can basically put the gantry in exact point of squareness. So here we just want to make sure our tool is staying on top of the groove all the way, So if your machine already has the gantry installed, this is what you have to do to put it in square. Just loosen the motor on one side with the other motor powered on, so it's holding its position, and then the side that's loose, move it by hand until it's in the square position, and then tighten it. And basically do the test again. Just move the machine from left to right or right to left, and your spindle or your reference tool has to stay on top. After this, if your gantry needs a little bit more adjustment, just power on the machine so both motors are energized, and then loosen the motor from one side. So the motor and the gearbox, loosen it from one side of the gantry, and then the side that's loose, you can push it by hand and put that side back into a square. And when it's in a square, just retighten the motor and power the machine off. Thanks for watching.